All right, great. Well, let's see how this goes. All right, good morning all and welcome. Oh, here comes. All right, good morning again, and welcome to our Bible study. And since it's Labor Day, it's probably not a full one, probably won't take our full time, but we'll just kind of do intro stuff today. So looking at what we've done in the past, trying to figure out what to do for the fall, someone had suggested looking at more obscure, more books from the New Testament we don't always look at as deeply or as often. And I was going to do the Catholic epistles, but then I remembered we did 1 Peter in May, and that takes away a good chunk of those. So instead, we're going to do the 1st and 2nd Thessalonians to start with, and we'll see where we go from there. So today, since Labor Day and people are traveling and things, I'm just going to set up the context of Thessalonians, and then we'll get into the book starting next week. Oh, Norm, we're on the service, not the Bible study. I mean, we can go through the service, but it won't tell us anything about the Thessalonians. Or while we're waiting, you all know what the Luther seal represents, right? How old is the seal? Well, I mean, it's Luther's seal. I mean, he designed it appropriated it, used it in his teaching, and he's got an explanation for it, and it looks an awful lot like the stained glass windows in the monastery in Erfurt, if I'm remembering right. It's either the monastery in Erfurt or the Castle Church in Wittenberg. One of the two has a lot of flower designs that look an awful lot like that. So, all right, here we go. Thank you, Norm. All right, so we're looking at Thessalonians, and we'll start out with 1 Thessalonians, which makes sense, right? And part of why then the interesting things we're looking at it are that it's possibly the earliest book of the New Testament, written in about 49 but somewhere between 49 and 52 A.D. And we know it's written by Paul, and we know it's written from Corinth. And only Galatians is the one that would possibly be earlier of all the New Testament books. Of course, the Gospels describe events that happened earlier, but they're not written until late 50s, early 60s usually is how we date those. But this is the first of Paul's letters, or second, but most people think it's first. written by Paul. All right, and so the context, well, let's look at where Thessalonica is, which is, of course, a nice, fun, long name to say lots of times. So it was founded in about 315 BC by King Cassander of Macedon, and it was named after his wife, who was Alexander the Great's half-sister. So here's even we found an inscription that says, to Queen Thessalonica, daughter of Philip of Macedon, and this is at the Archaeological Museum of Thessaloniki that you could still go and find today if you fly over to Greece. All right, and so Thessalonica is made then, so it's run by the Macedonians for a bit, and then it's conquered by the Romans in about 160 BC, and then it's made the capital of the Roman province of Macedonia in 148 BC, and you can kind of see the area that contains, so northern Greece, or northern modern-day Greece, some Albania, and some other littler Balkan countries there too. It became a free city of the Roman Republic under Mark Antony in 41 BC, as he was part of that group with Julius Caesar that was trying to control different things. But then he ends up, of course, he and Julius Caesar end up losing to a guy named Octavian, who eventually becomes known as Augustus Caesar, and ends the Republic, starts the Roman Empire. But Thessalonica still continues to be an important city. Why? Well, it's a major seaport as a stop on the Via Egnatia, a major road that connects Dyrrhachium with Byzantium or Constantinople. So Thessalonica is right here. So it's got a bay, it's a harbor. It's also, if you go overland from the boot of Italy, so from Rome over here, if you just cross the little bit of the Adriatic Sea, then there's a road that goes from here to Thessalonica, and then from there especially it's flat and straight to Byzantium, Constantinople. And then there's also some other roads through the mountains in the north that come close to Thessalonica too. So it's a fairly major center of trade, by not only overland but also by sea. Yes, those roads are still there today. They actually, I saw on Wikipedia, there's a part of the Via Egnatia that's been paved over and is part of the Greek, equivalent of the interstate system or highway system. It's just same spot. Rome, and there's other spots where you can still see the roads because the Romans made good roads. All right, and some sources have Thessalonica at a population of about 200,000 when Paul visits, so this was a pretty major city at that point. And when Paul visits, this was part of his second missionary journey to Thessalonica. And we'll look at how that begins. But you can see Paul starts out in Antioch, goes overland through Tarsus, Derbe, Lystra, which is where he picks up Timothy, goes to Antioch, Troas. He tries to go this way, and then said, "Come to Macedonia and help us," and goes to Philippi and then Thessalonica and Berea, before heading back down to Athens and Corinth.
Any idea how many miles that would have been?
That's a good question. I forgot to mark that down, and I don't think any of my maps have a good key. We'll look and see, but a lot. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of it was walking. There's a little bit of sea travel here and there, but.
So, how much time is the second missionary journey?
It's a few years, but at least part of that is he spends 18 months in Corinth. But But yeah, I want to say it's 3-4-ish years.
Okay.
Again, there's some parts we can date pretty clearly, and other parts we don't know. And we'll even get to that when we talk about his time in Thessalonica, because it seems really short, but there's debate over whether it's as short as it sounds or whether it's actually longer. All right. So as Paul's going on his missionary journey, could someone read this for us, please?
And the vision appeared to Paul in the night. The man of Macedonia was standing there, urging him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." And when Paul had seen the vision, immediately we sought to go on into Macedonia, including that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. So, setting sail from Troas, we made a direct voyage to Samothrace, and the following day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is the leading city of the district of Macedonia, and a Roman colony. We remained in the city some days.
All right, so that gets Paul from, again, he's traveling up this way. He's been in Derbe, Lystra, and Antioch. He picks up Timothy in Lystra. And then Paul wants to go this way, but everything keeps getting blocked, and so they get to Troas, and he has this dream of this man from Macedonia come over and help us, and so they sail over to Samothrace and Neapolis, and then eventually Philippi. Now, does anyone know or remember why this is important? What's momentous about Paul getting to this area?
He's in Europe now.
What?
He's in Europe.
He's in Europe, yes. This is the first time Paul gets to Europe. All the rest of the time, again, Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, down here in Israel. So he's been in Asia, then he's crossed into Europe, which is, of course, then, important for those of us of European descent, that the gospel gets there. All right, any other thoughts, questions, comments on that part?
Well, maybe offline a little bit, but there is a small town in western Iowa, Macedonia. Carson, Macedonia school system years ago, south of Harlan, about 30, 40 miles.
Okay.
Had to have been.
Well, I mean, it's an important area of the world. Again, that's where Alexander the Great came from. It's mentioned here in the Bible. There's actually, I'm trying to remember its exact name, but there's a current nation of Macedonia that exists at the moment. I'm trying to. Its technical name is something like the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia or something, just because the Greeks didn't like them claiming Macedonia, because the Greeks like to claim, the Macedonians for themselves. But yeah, so it's an important place for a lot of reasons. But this could be. But I had no idea there was a Macedonia in Iowa. So how about that?
Where is Macedonia?
It's this area that's here. It's labeled Greece on this one. I've got a different map of missionary journey later on that might clarify it a little bit, but and part of the challenge too is that there's some of these places that depending on what time of history it is, that what's contained within the Roman province of Macedonia changes. When the Romans first conquered, they divided it into four different districts, and then they decided it was more efficient and made just one district. And some of the boundaries shifted depending on how much they were controlling, where the barbarians were, and who was in charge of which governorship and that kind of thing. But yeah, generally kind of what we call think of as sort of northern Greece. This area would be what we call it. All right, and so here they're hanging out in Philippi, and this is the start of what they do. Could someone read this, please?
And on the seventh day, we went outside the gate to the riverside, where we supposed that there was a place to pray. And we sat down and spoke to the women who had come together. One who heard us was a woman named Lydia from the city of Thyatira. Okay.
Thyatira, yeah.
Thyatira. A seller of purple goods who was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to pay attention to what was said by Paul. And after she was baptized, and her whole household as well, she urged us, saying, if you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay. And she prevailed upon us.
All right. So it may not have been where Paul wanted to go, but his trip to Macedonia, his missionary journey to Macedonia starts fairly well. They get to Philippi. They meet this woman named Lydia, and she prevails from them because again, they go down to the riverside for a place of prayer because there's apparently not enough Jews to have a synagogue in Philippi because you need 10 men to form a synagogue. So if you don't have that, then you couldn't get together. And so that was part of what's going on here is then that there's a place where they'd get together, but it wasn't an official synagogue. So, all right. But then Paul and Silas get arrested in Philippi. There's the earthquake and everything, and the jailer gets scared, but then the jailer gets converted when Paul and Silas say, yes, we could go, but we won't because we don't want you to lose your life. And then Paul also pulls out his I'm a Roman citizen card, and the Philippi, the retirement colony for Roman soldiers, realizes that they should treat Roman citizens good. And so that protects the church, and then Paul and company move on. And also note, let's see, where did that go? Yes. Also note that this is part of Acts where we get this first person we, so we assume this is part of the time that Luke's with them. You know, when you're reading Acts, when it goes to we assume that means Luke's with them, and when it's they. Then we assume Luke is not with them. So
how big a group is this? Lydia says, "Oh yeah, come to my house."
Right. It's probably at least Paul, Silas, Timothy, and Luke, and maybe a few others. So, but again, she's a seller of purple goods, and so seems to be fairly well off and have enough space for some travelers to stay with her.
Remember too, with space, we have a different understanding of luxury.
Right.
You hear the stories about Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. John Adams and Ben Franklin, when they went visiting and stuff. They slept in the same bed,
Yeah. And this is also
as we do.
Right, and this is also, Greece. This isn't Iowa in winter. You can sleep out in a courtyard, or there's not necessarily a need to, need for enclosed spaces and things. So, all right. So then we get to Acts 17, and again here we get they. So Luke's not with them at this point, and this is where they keep going down the road from Philippi to Thessalonica. And could someone read this? I think these are the only two weird names.
Now when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of Jews. And Paul went in, as was his custom, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead, and saying, "This Jesus whom I proclaim to you is the Christ." And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a great many of the devout Greeks, and not a few of the leading women. But the Jews were jealous, and taking some wicked men of the rabble, they formed a mob, set the city in an uproar, and attacked the house of Jason, seeking to bring them out to the crowd. And when they could not find them, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have turned the world upside down have come here also, and Jason has received them. And they are all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus." And the people and the city authorities were disturbed when they heard these things. And when they had taken money as security from Jason and the rest, they let them go.
All right. So how's Paul's welcome in Thessalonica? Well, yeah, I mean, it starts out okay, but Paul has a tendency to end up causing trouble, or being accused of causing trouble. All right. So what happens? So again, and this is like I said, part of why we have trouble dating. So it says Paul's there for speaks in the synagogue 3 Sabbath days. So we assume he's there about 3 weeks. But there's some debate that he could have been there longer, and just happened to be 3. Those were the 3 Sabbath days he got on the, got in on the service to be able to talk. But still not there as long as he wanted to be. All right, because what happens? So he has.
Well, some that are believing him and realizing that his logic is true. His argument is true.
So again, this is Paul's kind of MO. His work is when he gets somewhere, he finds the synagogue first, and then when he's talking with the Jews, he starts from the Scripture, starts from the Old Testament, and points them to Jesus that way. And then hear his arguments is persuasive, that he not only gets some of the Jews, he also gets some devout Greeks. Because again, this is a fairly Greek area. There's some Jews, but not necessarily a whole lot here. But they'd attracted some interest from some Greeks, and some of those become interested in what Paul's saying as well. And not a few of the leading women. Again, that there's some attraction for them as well. But that, of course, causes jealousy, because the synagogue's like, wait, we're losing all these people because of this guy that's coming in and saying Jesus is the Messiah. And so they get a mob together and attack Jason, who's apparently one of the people that's helping Paul here. And what do they accuse them of? Turning the world upside down.
And I guess that's about right.
Yeah. So it's how the Jews know this is how do you get the city officials involved? Well, they're not going to care about a religious dispute, but if they start, well, no, they don't say. They say Jesus is king, not Caesar is king. They say Jesus is Lord, not Caesar is Lord. So this is a political problem, not a religious problem.
Right.
So you need to get involved here. But Jason seems to at least have had enough influence. He gets by on posting bail, and calls it good. But yeah, still usual. Again, this is part in some ways of taking up your cross. Of we're going to do this even though we're facing this persecution, even though we know that there could be challenges. So that's usually what happens when it's one thing to just talk about Jesus, but it's once you hit people in their livelihood that's when. So we skipped over it, but part of why Paul and Silas are arrested in Philippi is because Paul drives out the demon from the fortune-telling girl, and which saves her, but then her owners are out of money. Well, she can't predict the future anymore. Or later in Ephesus, One thing, it's fine for you if you're talking about Jesus, but once we stop being able to sell our Artemis statues, then, you hit us in the pocketbook, that's when we get angry, so. All right, so here's a slightly different map of, again, Paul's second missionary journey. We get the provinces kind of divided up in a better way. So this area is what was Macedonia at the time. North of it's area called Thrace. And then we get here, it's Asia, and that's even divided up into some of those other provinces we hear about different ways. All right. All right, any other thoughts, questions, comments? All right, so after the riot, after Jason and his buddies post bail, and then here's what happens next. Can someone read that for us?
The brothers immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea, and when they arrived, they went into the Jewish synagogue.
Oh, sorry, I had a graphic instead of the text here, but it's still there. So now these Jews were more noble than those in Thessalonica. They received the word with all eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see if things were so. And you can keep reading here this time, Marcia.
Many of them therefore believed, when not a few Greek women of high standing as well as men. But when the Jews from Thessalonica learned that the word of God was proclaimed by Paul at Berea also, they came there too, agitating and stirring up the crowds. Then the brothers immediately sent Paul off on his way to the sea, but Silas and Timothy remained there. Those who conducted Paul brought him as far as Athens, and after receiving a command for Silas and Timothy to come to him as soon as possible, they departed.
All right. All right, so this is where, so they go down, and from Thessalonica to Berea, it's not that far. But then the Jews from Thessalonica hear about that, come to Berea, cause more trouble, and so they send Paul by sea to Athens, but Silas and Timothy stay to strengthen the group there, and then they're supposed to meet up with Paul in Athens later, but Paul's left in Athens. All right, any thoughts, questions, comments about that?
Well, there's adversarial all the way along. There's good, there's people
Yeah.
chasing them. See
Yeah.
that every day.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't know, I was going to wonder that they kept going. It's,
Mhm.
get a little tired of it after a while. Here comes the guys from Thessalonica.
Yeah.
They're like 9 miles away. Why are they here? Well, gotta chase him off here too.
Yeah. I mean, Paul has definitely had some stubbornness and determination to him.
Yeah.
And you wonder that if Silas and Timothy were at least either less intimidating or, help balance Paul out. I mean, I think Barnabas did that some too. He's the son of encouragement, who's could argue with people if needed, but that didn't seem to be his default position. Kind of like when we went through the Book of Concord and talked about the Reformation stuff. Luther and Melanchthon balanced each other well too. Not every age called for Luther's tact, but Melanchthon could sometimes be a little too conciliatory on things, and so balanced each other out that way.
Well, where was that Acts where that we just read?
Acts 17.
Okay, I was thinking it was Acts 14 where they even pulled Paul out the front gates of the town and stoned him and left him for dead.
Yep.
Is that coming up yet, or is that?
That was, yeah, I think that could have been Acts 14. That was on his first missionary journey. Yeah, I'm trying to remember that's the end of Acts or in one of his later letters that he talks about everything he's gone through, and you go, oh yeah, shipwrecked twice or three times. I mean, it's just, yeah. I mean, there's a reason. I mean, when he talks about his the thorn in the flesh, there's a lot of debate. It's at least he had enough physical ailments that, I mean, you get a bad back after after being beaten so much, or some of those injuries that didn't heal well, or something like that. So, what was it? Oh yeah, we don't get a letter to the Bereans, but they get to be kind of infamous again for these, that they study the scriptures daily. In fact, there's on the way we go to the state fair in Des Moines, there's a Berean fellowship church right on the side there. They got something to aspire to. All right. And so again, Paul is traveling with Timothy and Silas. At this point, we talked some about Silas a little because he ends up helping Peter too. But Silas or Silvanus, Silvanus seems to be that's the Greek name. Silas is Latin. Travels with Paul on a second missionary journey, and he's perhaps Paul's scribe. He's the one who helps write the letters, and is later commended for his preaching in Corinth. So he seems to be able to do that as well. And Peter mentions him, and perhaps used him as a scribe when he wrote 1 Peter. So Silas seems to travel around a lot too. But again, Peter and Paul are, presumably in Rome, similar time at when Peter's writing his letters. So, so that's Silas. And then of course Timothy joined Paul in Lystra and remained with him throughout the second missionary journey. And was taught the faith by his mother and grandmother, but he'd had a Greek father, and so he's kind of able to have that foot in both worlds. And in fact, Paul has Timothy circumcised, so that's not an issue when he's working with the Jews, even though he spends all his time arguing that circumcision isn't necessary. But knows for Timothy this is it'll help more than it hurts. And of course, then Timothy ends up being the recipient of a couple of Paul's, what we call the pastoral epistles that Timothy's get left at a church, and Paul writes to him a couple times, giving him advice on how to handle things, from big to small, including drink a little wine to help your stomach. All right. So then. Then Paul gets to Athens. Silas and Timothy stay up north and are able to return to Thessalonica. Paul, on the one hand, then, after this, he's left alone in Athens. Of course, what does he do? Goes find the philosophers and argues with them. But doesn't start with Scripture. Starts with creation and these altars around him, including the altar to the unknown God. And he at least gets people to pay attention until he starts talking about resurrection, and then they get confused and start laughing him off. But then he gets to Corinth and spends about 18 months there. And Silas and Timothy meet up with Paul then in Corinth, and especially Timothy's report about what's going on in Thessalonica. That is kind of the reason for this letter. So again, that's always the challenge we get when we're reading Paul's epistles, is that Paul's writing back to these churches that he's taught in, kind of filling in the blanks of that he'd started these churches. Usually he'd taught there for a bit, then left, and then he hears about what's going on, and then he writes a letter trying to help them with whatever they're going through. And so that's what 1 Thessalonians is, but then the challenge with that is usually that sometimes we miss all of what Paul had taught them in Thessalonica that he's assuming they remember, and so sometimes there's assumptions that we miss. That's why Romans is always such a good thing, because Paul has to write out everything, because he hasn't been to Rome before, so he has to start from the beginning and explain things in a clearer way. So that's the occasion. Again, Paul had been in Thessalonica, but was only there for probably at least 3 weeks, probably not much longer than that. And so before he's chased out, and so didn't have a chance to fully inform this group. And so writing back, trying to fill in the blanks, because he hears about their faithfulness in the face of persecution, but also hears some weird things going on, and so writes to let them know what to do. All right. And yeah, last map, I think. Yep. All right. Any final thoughts, questions, comments? We'll dig into. We'll start digging into 1 Thessalonians again next week.
There was a movie came out a while back, I think it was simply called Paul, an Apostle of Christ, and it was basically, he was in prison the whole time.
Yeah.
I think the guy that acted the part in the Passion of Jesus is Luke, I think, in that movie, and comes and visits him, and it's quite, it's a, I don't know how they're completely accurate, but a very good movie, Paul, an Apostle of Christ.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. And see you next week.
I found a chart online that gives the distances or approximate distances of Paul's second journey, and it's from Antioch to Thessalonica is somewhere around 1,040 miles. give or take.
Nice.
All right. So let me get back to all right. So from Antioch to Thessalonica is over 1,000 miles.
Yes.
Okay.
Huh.
I believe it. So again, I mean, this is that, part of what seems to work in terms of timing is that even though there's no mass communication, there are roads and there's peace-ish, so people are able to travel these greater distances more effectively at this point than at other points in history. So with efficient roads and ships and things. And, yeah. No, good. Thanks, Norm. All right.
I'm amazed at communications has to happen.
Yeah.
Paul and Silas said, well, I'll meet you somewhere, and then meet months later.
Right. I mean, in some ways, it's hard to remember how we used to have to do that without cell phones. Yeah, I'll meet you somewhere, and we hope we'll line up. Oh, what was it? When I was in Germany 20 years ago, so it was after college graduation, I was hopping trains and was meeting up with a friend from high school who was studying abroad for the semester. And the way it worked, because we didn't have was I got to the train station in Erfurt, and there was a piece of paper stuck on a post that had my name on it, and an arrow that said, "Go this way." And then I got to and they pointed me to the bus stop, and there's another one that told me what bus to ride. And it worked, but it was yeah. I mean, it's amazing how much we depend on that kind of stuff. But yeah, okay, Paul, go to Athens. We'll meet you up. We'll meet up with you there, or we'll go somewhere else. And I mean, I think in some ways you had some certain things. Again, Paul usually check in with the synagogue, so he checked in with the synagogue. Paul was a tent maker, and he runs with these other tent makers, so go and check with the tent makers. So you can meet this guy named Paul. He tell you where he's going. Oh, he ran off that way with chased by a mob. Okay, we'll follow the mob. We'll find him eventually. Okay, what's your question?
Did they always travel by foot, or did they have horses? Or?
I mean, there were horses and chariots and things. I think for the most part you have feet. I mean, I know that's one of those things with the artistic depiction of, especially when Paul encounters Jesus on the road to Damascus. You know, that's sometimes shown that Paul falls off a horse. There's no description, no mention of a horse in that description at all. But you know, the idea that he's important enough, he's riding as he's going to Damascus to stop the church there. But yeah, I mean, so generally walking. You had some, there were some horses and chariots and camels and wagons and things, but I think a lot of times they were more walking than much anything. Yeah. They had to have really good sandals and really tough feet. So, yep.
There was no postal service to get letters around, was there? You'd have to find someone to take them.
Right. I mean, so usually, yeah. We'll talk about this when we hit the. But Paul usually, begins. Mentions in his letter who he thinks is going to be the one that's carrying it to the church. So yeah, it's usually sent with a trusted person, and just hit up the Pony Express or whatever. I mean, there are certainly systems of couriers around that the Romans used for intergovernmental and military stuff, but not necessarily something civilians always had access to. All right. Well, great. Well, thank you again for coming.
Yep.
And we'll see you next week.
Yep.